Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. So today we're going to be talking about writing in third-person limited point of view. Third-person limited is a point of view where the story is told from the close perspective of one character, but with an outside viewpoint. So the narrative is looking at the character, describing them externally, as well as internally, rather than the story coming from the character's own voice, like in first person. So we're looking at the character and the narrative will refer to them as he, she, their, any third person pronoun, as opposed to first person where the main character is telling the story referring to themselves as I. Third person limited is a very popular point of view choice, and for good reason. It's a great middle ground because it gives you the closeness and intimacy of first person, while also giving you the control of omniscient point of view. It's also useful if you want a tight scope focused on one character, but that character just isn't a valuable first-person narrator. Some characters just don't make for good first-person narrators. Maybe they aren't articulate enough or aren't observant enough. Maybe they're too young or too unreliable in a story where that's not what you want. So let's start by talking about some of the qualities of this point of view and the reasons why it's so popular. First of all is you can create an intimate scope. First person is normally known for its ability to create intimacy and tight scope. You can easily do this in third person limited as well. Third person limited offers that tight scope on a character's thoughts, emotions, worldview, feelings, etc., etc., just like first person does. You can create a sense of closeness and narrative empathy with a character, even from third person. The second benefit is showing versus telling. You've probably heard the old show don't tell rule more times than you can count, but third person limited can really be a great vehicle for pushing you to show rather than tell more. Because in limited point of view, the narrator only has access to what the main character knows and feels. The thoughts and feelings of all other characters have to be inferred, which means you have to show them through details, body language, and anything that can be perceived externally. So this is an example from Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway, which I believe is actually an objective point of view, but the technique used is just like a third-person limited narrator would use to describe characters other than the protagonist. The American and the girl with him sat at a table in the shade outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went to Madrid. So being told that it's very hot out and the train won't come for 40 minutes kind of sets the tone and sense that these characters are probably a little irritated and uncomfortable. The third benefit is that you can maintain surprise and uncertainty. Third-person limited is very common in mystery, thriller, horror, and suspense books for a reason. It's a very natural way to tell a story that has a lot of plot twists and unknowns. An omniscient narrator by nature already knows who the killer is and is hiding that information from the reader. A limited narrator only knows what the viewpoint character knows, so withholding information is a lot more natural. There is no all-knowing entity who has known all along, so we have to discover things as the character does. But there's also some added suspense in a story that has life or death stakes. First person, especially first person past tense, typically tells us the main character survives, unless they're somehow telling the story from beyond the grave. But third person point of view creates a greater sense of uncertainty, especially in a book with multiple point of views, because any character could die at any time, so the stakes feel a lot more real. The next benefit is that you can take advantage of the narrator's more objective qualities as well. We've been talking about the benefits of the intimate qualities of a limited narrator, but they can also have more objective qualities that you don't really get in first person that can be really beneficial. Unlike in first person, in limited point of view, you can actually create a sliver of distance between the narrator and the protagonist and see them a bit more externally, and you can't really do this in first person. The angle that your third person narrator has on the story can be different depending on the book. Sometimes a third person narrator is very, very close to the main character and feels and thinks exactly what they think. It's essentially just an extension of themselves. But sometimes a third person narrator is a little more objective and can see the main character in ways that maybe the main character doesn't understand themselves yet. Sometimes the third person narrator can see things about the main character that they're not perceptive enough to see within themselves. Though a lot of the time, and in many ways, a third person narrator is just the protagonist from a different angle, sometimes you want to create a little more distance, and that can be done to great effect, and third person limited allows you to do that. You can kind of choose how close you want to be to your protagonist. Whereas in first person, you don't have much choice. The narrator is the protagonist. So here's an example from The Lie Tree by Frances Harding. In this example, the narrator is able to achieve a level of clarity about the main character, Faith, that she herself is not able to articulate yet. Some characters are just not self-understanding enough or observant enough yet to make good first-person narrators, so third person can be a great alternative. In Faith's mind, it was always that. She never gave it another name for fear of yielding it yet more power over her. That was an addiction, she knew that much. That was something she was always giving up, except that she never did. That was the very opposite of Faith as the world knew her. Faith the good girl, the rock. Reliable, dull, trustworthy Faith. So now let's talk a little bit about some common mistakes in third person limited. First of all is filtering the action. I talked about this as well in the video on first person, and it's a problem that can come up in third person as well. When you filter in first person, the problem is that it creates jarring distance in an inherently very close point of view. In third person, the problem is that it just creates a very distant psychic distance. In order to keep the narrator as close as possible to the main character, you want to remove filters from your prose. Filters are any construction that describes a sensory experience rather than the experience itself. So for example, he saw, she heard, they felt, anything like that. So here's an example from John Gardner's book, The Art of Fiction. Turning, she noticed two snakes fighting in among the rocks. Without the filters, it reads as, she turned, in among the rocks, two snakes were fighting. So you can be a lot more direct and close when you don't have the filters. Rather than saying that she's noticing the snakes, just show the snakes. The next common issue is head hopping. Head hopping is when your narrator reveals the thoughts or feelings of a non-point of view character. So here's a little example, and it's important to note for this example that Kelly is our point of view character. Kelly stared at Eileen in shock. Afraid Kelly would confront her, Eileen turned away. The thing is, Kelly doesn't know how Eileen feels, so she can't reveal this. She can make guesses, she can infer, but she doesn't know this because she doesn't have access to Eileen's thoughts. So you'd have to find a way to show or imply what Eileen is thinking or feeling, or have maybe Kelly guess at it, rather than saying it directly, because that's not information that this narrator knows. The next common mistake is too many point of views. Now, third person limited can be a great choice for a multi-point of view novel. It's actually very common to have multi-point of view novels where you have multiple different narrators all told through third person limited. This can give you a really broad scope, much like in an omniscient point of view, but still give you all the benefits of third person limited and give it that kind of more modern contemporary flair, since limited is the more common choice nowadays. Just because you have the ability to include a lot of point of views doesn't mean that you should include every point of view under the sun. A very common mistake is including more point of views than the story needs, overloading your story with perspective, and what happens is it starts to take away from the characters who are really important, who really matter. Every point of view you add to your story, you want to do very intentionally. It should be to serve a distinct purpose in your book, and because it contributes to the overall effect of your story. There is no number you need to stick to, but keep the scope as tight as possible and add your new perspectives with intention. The next very common mistake, probably the most common, is the psychic distance is too far, or there's just not enough interiority. This is a very common mistake for writers who are new to writing in general or new to writing in third person, and it's just to have a really far psychic distance. And a lot of the time this happens because they just don't include enough interiority. We don't get enough thoughts, we don't get enough feelings, and it doesn't feel like the point of view is rooted in the protagonist's experience. It almost feels like a completely external separate force, just watching the main character very objectively. We have an entire video on psychic distance that I'll leave a link to. I won't get into the whole thing now for the sake of time because it is a somewhat complicated concept, but if you're writing in third person limited, it's probably one of the most important concepts to understand. So those are some tips on how to write in third person. If you're an avid third person writer, I would love to hear about your experiences writing in this point of view in the comments, as well as your favorite book written in third person limited. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time.